Yo, what's good, YouTube, man? It's Gary with another Fan TV. Back at another video. Like the content of this video, go smash that like button. Like the content of this channel, go and subscribe, man. Look, talking to you after another embarrassing drubbing, right? The Ravens lose 44-10 versus the Houston Texans today, in a game that was over in the second quarter. Early second quarter, game was over with. I believe the end of the first quarter, it was 7-3. Texans scored on a pretty easy drive. Ravens respond with a field goal. Like, okay, maybe we got a game here. Not at all. Well, it wasn't a game at all. It wasn't even close. All right. Now, obviously, the Ravens had, I think the number they said was almost $160 million worth of the cap space was inactive today, right? So we'll go over some of the inactive names. To me, that really has no bearing on how bad they played. Because they were bad with most of those guys playing, right? So to me, that really has nothing to do with it. But we'll talk about that. So inactive, Roquan Smith, Jadobi Awuzie, Lamar Jackson, Kyle Hamilton, Patrick Ricard, Marlon Humphrey, Ronnie Stanley. Pretty much, if there was a big name player on the Ravens, right, he almost certainly wasn't playing, right? There's still a couple of guys out there, your always, your Kyle Van Noy's on defense, things like that. But, a lot of important pieces missing, right? So we'll say all of that. It was no excuse for how poor they played today. All right. Now in my game preview, right? When I talk about these games, I always want to reference my game preview because I want to make sure that I'm aligning with my points that I said, and I ain't talking out both sides of my mouth, right? So when I did the game preview video, right, I said that the keys to the game was, especially for the defense, right? Can Zach Orr devise a game plan that's going to help this team win this game, right? Can he protect the cornerbacks? Can he take advantage of a bad offensive line? All right, because this game wasn't going to really be about Cooper rushing the offense, right? Even though I did mention the X factors on the offense, the X factors being like, the Ravens offensive skill players, right? But at the end of the day, if the Ravens were going to do anything in this game, they could not let the Texans get above, like, say, 23 points, right? And the Texans ended up scoring 44. Okay. That's where this game lies to me. That's where all of this season has lied to me, right? I'm not looking to say to diminish Zach Orr, right? I'm not looking to do that. But at a certain point, you have to be held responsible for your actions. All right. Last year, the Ravens started slow. They ended up picking up at the end of the year. All right. This year, they've been bad the entire season outside of one game versus Cleveland, and they weren't really all that great that game either. Okay. So if I look at it from those metrics, right, you have pretty much now a full season of bad football on the defensive side of the ball. Right. If you want to compare it to the predecessor, Mike Macdonald, we gave Mike Macdonald half of his first year. Then after that first half of the first year, the Ravens defense was great from that point on. The second half of his first year, the Ravens really turned it up, really got into form, similar to Zach Orr. But then that next year, they took it to another level, right? This was supposed to be the another level leap. They've gone another level in the opposite direction, all right? So, every game that I watch for the Ravens, especially as I started doing this YouTube channel, right, I take notes of the game, right? I take notes so I can remember things and, bring things up, talk about points of the game, right? So it doesn't feel like I'm rambling, right? I can know what I'm saying when, when I turn the camera on. It was 34-3. I just stopped writing stuff down. Okay. I just stopped taking notes on my phone. Because at that point, what am I taking notes about, right? Am I taking notes about Mark Andrews dropping the ball, bobbling it, interception? Am I taking notes about that? Am I taking notes about Cooper Rush, double clutch, throwing a pick into the flat? Zay Flowers had a nice play down the field, 56 yards, but ultimately that meant nothing, right? So I stopped doing that, right? The Texans, they came in here, they did what they needed to do. They got the W. They're now 2-3 on the season. The Ravens fall to 1-4. It is what it is when it comes to that, right? But the thing that makes this a fireable offense for Zach Orr is the simple fact now, this is the second week in a row where a struggling offense, right, has found their groove against you. Okay. The Ravens are now officially becoming the slump busters of the NFL. If your offense is in a rut, in a bad place, come play the Baltimore Ravens, right? You'll get out of it. You'll rebound. You'll play a good offense. Because this Texas team, this looked like how C.J. Stroud was looking at as a rookie. Everything was easy. Everything was open. Deep passes, short passes, intermediate passes. It didn't matter. Everything was open, right? And listen, Zach Orr in this defense was in a tough spot with the injuries. That would be a valid, valuable excuse if they weren't bad when all of these guys were healthy too. If all these Ravens were healthy and this Ravens defense was playing lights out, then all these guys get hurt and we're like, dang, man, he just don't got the talent to do it. It sucks, but It's unfortunate. We got to get the guys back. No, when the guys were playing, they were bad. So the Ravens, to me, right? People are talking about blow this team up, things like that, and I get all that talk, right? I mentioned in my, another video I did this week talking about, the Ravens season really isn't over, right? They have a chance. They're going to be 1-5 going into the bye week more than likely. And Lamar Jackson comes back versus the Browns, not the Browns, versus the Bears, excuse me. And the Ravens have a soft back end of the schedule. They can get to 10-7. 10-7 might win the division. 10-7 will probably get them into the playoffs. It's possible. But the way this team looks right now, the way this defense is, the defense is too bad to even get this team to 10-7. The defense is too bad. You know what I mean? It's just a simple matter of fact, though, right? That turnaround that they had last year, I just don't see if everything stays the same. Where does that turnaround come from? Right? There's who is bringing that hope. I don't see that. Right now, listen. Harbaugh already said that in his post-game press conference that I don't believe firing Zach Orr is the answer. Right? He has coddled Zach Orr. He's treated him like a baby because Zach Orr is Harbaugh Mafia. Right? He's part of the Harbaugh clan. Right? Once you in there, you snug in there. There's nothing you can do about it. Right? So Zach Orr, he's going to finish out. I will be shocked if he doesn't finish out this season as the defensive coordinator. After that, they'll probably let him go. Be quite honest with you. But he may even relinquish play calling duties, which in fact would be a demotion. I don't think they'll outright fire Zach Orr, but he could very well be demoted. Right? That's the kind of the strength of bringing a guy like Chuck Pagano, because you can demote Zach Orr and promote Chuck Pagano, and it's weird, but it's something that they can do. But this leads to a bigger issue with the Ravens organization being too buddy-buddy, right? The Ravens don't really make cutthroat decisions because everybody that Harbaugh hires are his friends, and he doesn't want to piss off his friends. It's the same reason a couple years ago why Greg Roman was held on for so long, because him and Greg Roman are good friends, so he didn't want to piss off his friend, right? Because Greg Roman goes back to ties with the brother Jim Harbaugh, right? That Harbaugh Mafia clan. Once you in there, right? Doesn't matter which brother we talking about. All right. So Harbaugh's always been over committed to his coaches and not getting them out of there, right? And Monken was a good hire, but honestly, Monken is outside of the Harbaugh tree, right? Being completely honest, right? So, take that with a grain of salt. So for the Ravens, this team showed no fight, no willingness to do anything on defense. The offense was it was okay. It was nice to keep Mitchell get some touches in early in the game and whatnot. Cooper Rush, he's bad. Like I mean, you know what I mean? Like in the offensive line, they held up for the first drive of the game. They held up for some other drives in the game, but mainly for the most part, the Texas defensive line was doing what they were supposed to do. Will Anderson, Danielle Hunter, some of the Texas defensive tackles they were shedding. They were getting on Cooper Rush. Cooper Rush had a play, I believe, in the second quarter where he tried to spin around, get away from two guys. You're not going to do that, Cooper Rush. Throw the ball out of bounds, bro. You're not getting away from any defensive lineman in the NFL. Throw it out of bounds. He didn't. He got sacked and it killed the drive. So it's a tough spot for him. I feel bad for him, right? You're replacing a guy in Lamar Jackson who is one of, if not the best quarterback in the league when healthy, in my opinion. So you're in a tough spot. But Ravens have plenty of skill on offense. But Cooper Rush, he's a backup quarterback. I'm sure he's a nice guy. He gets along in the locker room. That's why he can have a job. He can't play. All right. I don't understand why the Ravens didn't play Tyler Huntley. If the Ravens play Tyler Huntley, I'm not saying they win this game, right? They don't. It doesn't matter who's the quarterback unless it's Lamar Jackson under center. The Ravens aren't scoring 45 points to beat this 44 that Texas dropped in their head. That wasn't happening. But Tyler Huntley could probably give them a more competitive game than Cooper Rush gave them, right? I think that's pretty lukewarm to say. I don't think that's a grasping at straws take. All right. But they decided not to go that route. So for the Ravens, they're 1-4 right now. They're going to be 1-5 after they play the Rams. And I'm not saying the season's over with. I still believe that there is a chance for them to turn around, go 10-5, not 10-5, sorry, 10-7, 11-6. That's still a possibility. But as far as winning playoff games, winning multiple playoff games, winning Super Bowl, all of that has been out the window. That's out the window, right? This team is not good enough where it matters most, right? And where it matters most is in the trenches, right? This Ravens team gets no pass rush, and they can't protect the quarterback. They can't move people off the line of scrimmage trying to run the ball. They get moved back in the run game. Every negative connotation you could think of an old line and defensive line play, this Ravens team has, right? They are not strong up front and on either side of the ball. They're just not, okay? And there's nothing that you could really say about that, right? And for years, for all the good that Eric DeCosta does, his blind spot has always been in the trenches, right? And some of this has to do with John Harbaugh and his stubbornness to play a guy like Daniel Falele who cannot play in the NFL. His stubbornness to say, hey, look, this is a guy that I want to invest time in. You're going to play. While a guy like, I'm not saying Ben Cleveland is some world beater, while a guy like Ben Cleveland is probably a better option, is not going to get time because for whatever reason, John Harbaugh has him in his doghouse. For whatever reason, I don't know what Ben Cleveland does in the building, how he works. Maybe all of that's an issue. I don't know, but he's in the doghouse, right? So you're starting guys who cannot play in this league, right? In my opinion, that's one of those guys, Dan Fleury. Then we talk about the Ravens have a real aversion to paying pass rushers, right? They let Matt Judon go out the building, who's a 10-sack guy, right? They let Zadarius Smith walk out the building. You know, this obviously this is also dating back years. They let Zadarius Smith walk out the building, who's a 10-plus sack guy. The Ravens have let talented pass rushers out the building because they think that they can just draft these guys based off of high production in the draft and transfer that to the NFL automatically. It doesn't always go like that. The Ravens have not had really a successful edge rusher in quite a long time since really, a guy like Justin Houston, right, who came here at the end of his career, and gave Ravens a pass rush, right? Jadeveon Clowney did some things, but when I watch Jadeveon Clowney in that 2023 team, it's the same thing we always say about the Ravens. They can't get home with four. If you need somebody who's going to go up there and dominate an offensive tackle or an offensive guard, the Ravens don't have that guy for the most part. And that's even extended to a guy like Nandi Madubuike. And I love Madubuike, right? But he had a great season when he broke out, got paid, things like that. But if we're saying, are you a Chris Jones level guy? No, right? And nobody's Aaron Donald, right? But like, are you a guy in the middle of the park that can wreck shop? And hey, these teams, can you get 5 pressures a game in the playoffs and teams have to really account for you? No. Off the edge, Odafe Oweh hasn't been that guy. He's been a disappointment. So the Ravens have invested in the trenches in terms of draft picks, right? They've drafted first round guys, they drafted second round guys, they drafted third round guys, right? They've thrown darts at it, but that's what it is when it comes to drafting, is darts at it. All right. Eric DeCosta and this regime are way too they hold on to draft picks too much. And this is supposed to be about the Texans. This is a whole state of the Ravens, conversation right now. But point being, right, because I can ramble on that for a long time. The point being is that the Ravens' lack of investment in the trenches is finally coming to roost, right? You don't have Lamar Jackson to bail you out on offense, right? You don't have a mastermind defensive coordinator to bail you out on defense, right? When Wink Martindale was here, and listen, Wink Martindale by the end got on my nerves too, all right? But at least he could get pressure on the quarterback, all right? It was all out blitz. Yes, it was reckless. It was dangerous, but at least he could get pressure on the quarterback. Mike McDonald devised a way to get Wink Martindale level pressure on a quarterback and also play sound coverage on the back end. The Ravens can't do that right now. All right. So they have a DC who can't do anything. Zach Orr can't send all out blitz and get pressure. Zach Orr doesn't know how to have simulated pressures to get pressure as well. He can't do either side of the spectrum. So now you're just sitting in a world where the Ravens where the quarterbacks going against the Ravens have all day to throw the football. It doesn't matter how good your secondary is if the quarterback gets 3-4 seconds to take a beat, look, and throw the football. It doesn't matter. Okay. So this Ravens team has a lot of decisions to make, in my opinion. Are they going to make these decisions now? The Ravens haven't been a team to make decisions during the middle of the year, so I don't expect them to do that now. But guys got to get fired, man. It's kind of simple as that. Guys got to get fired. The only coach, literally the one singular coach I'm okay with staying is Todd Monken. That's it. That's it. I like what Todd Monken does for the offense. I mean, yes, he has his warts, right? All coaches do. But if you ask me, with this one guy for the Ravens to keep it to be him, everybody else can go right now, and you reload the staff. That's my my opinion right now. So this Ravens team is just not very good, and they lack in the most important area, which is in the trenches. Man, football is a physical game played by physical people. The Ravens don't have physical people on either side of the ball up front. They don't, so the Ravens losing this game to Texas 44-10 really, to me, doesn't have much to do with let's talk about the game or anything like that. This is a overall problem that the Ravens have that runs organizationally deep. All right. They've drafted well. They drafted a lot of cornerbacks, things like that. But the lack of willingness to the willingness to hold on to draft picks, take 6 guys in the 4th round, take 5 guys in the 6th round, instead of trading some of these picks for an asset, right? So say a guy like, for example, I'm gonna wrap this video up, but say a guy like an instance like Hassan Reddick was available, right? He had his whole thing going on with the Jets, had his whole thing going on with the Eagles. Trade for Hassan Reddick for a couple of those 4th round, for a couple of those 6th round picks, and get Hassan Reddick, right? They don't even do low cost get a guy in here edge moves. It was the same kind of thing we had a problem with on the other side, but with receiver, right? When receiver talent was a real issue, why didn't the Ravens trade for DeAndre Hopkins in his prime? Why didn't they trade for Stephon Diggs in his prime, right? When these guys were available for picks that they could have got, the Ravens for moves the Ravens could have made. That would have helped Lamar Jackson immensely during that time, but they didn't do it because they're so beholden to draft picks. Too beholden to draft picks. When draft picks are a crapshoot at best, there is no guarantee because you have a lot of draft picks, you're going to hit on good players. You could say, well, we have more rolls of the dice. That's all it is rolling the dice. Give me the proven player. The Ravens don't do that enough because they're so stuck on draft picks. So we see a team right now that has a lot of draft picks, and they've missed on a lot of draft picks, and those draft picks aren't performing. So now when those draft picks aren't performing, we have nothing, right? So that's where the Ravens are currently. Give me guys' thoughts in the comments, man. Reply to all comments, but it's Gary Root on Fan TV. I'm out.